Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's October 8th, 2021 program, The Aftermath of Great Loss, the Modoc People Persevere. This is the fifth program of our 2021-2022 programming year, and I'm Karin Knudsen, President-elect of City Club. Support for City Club is provided by our members and sponsors, and we invite you to join us as a new or renewing member of City Club at our website, cityclubofeugene.org. The mission of the City Club of Eugene is to build community vision through open inquiry. And if you are already a member of City Club, you can attend any forum, even remotely, and ask a question of that program's invited speakers. If you're not yet a member, we encourage you to join us this week. And again, more information is available online at our website, cityclubofeugene.org. All City Club programs are available on our YouTube channel, Facebook page at City Club of Eugene, and as podcasts on Podbean. And all programs are broadcast on our local public radio station, KLCC 89.7, on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Before we introduce today's speakers, we have both business and in-kind sponsors to thank, including our diamond sponsors, Kaiser Permanente, the University of Oregon, Peace Health, and Lane Community College, as well as generous support from the City of Eugene and Lane County. In today's program, The Aftermath of Great Loss, the Modoc People Persevere, we welcome Dr. Donald Dexter, DMD, and cinematographer Christelle Ozis. More biographical information about our speakers is available on our website, cityclubofeugene.org, and I would like to especially thank Ralph Pledger for coordinating this program and providing today's introduction. The Modoc War, a conflict between the U.S. government and the Modoc people, took place during 1872 and 1873 in Northern California near the Oregon border. The war was hard fought, and the Modocs achieved initial victories despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned. But in the end, the U.S. Army won. The surviving Modocs were removed from their ancestral homelands. Some were sent to the Klamath Indian Reservation in Oregon, and others to a reservation in Oklahoma. 4 Modoc warriors were hanged, including their leader, Kinpwash, also known as Captain Jack. Donald Dexter, a Eugene dentist of Modoc descent, and local cinematographer Christelle Ozis are producing a documentary about the Modoc War and Modoc people. The working title is Modoc, Endeavor to Persevere. And Dr. Dexter also plans to create a memorial symbolizing the history and persistence of the Modoc people. Following our speakers' remarks today, City Club's format includes a question and answer period with today's speakers and City Club members via Zoom. Thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Hello, welcome to the City Club of Eugene. This is Andrew Kallick. From the Umatilla to the Umpqua, Coquille to the Klamath, the history of the territory that we now call Oregon is replete with stories from many tribes. One that might not have been in your textbook growing up is the story of the Modoc people, both in Oregon and in California. And we are so lucky to be able to learn more about that proud history today from 2 people who are working on telling that story. After their presentation, we'll have time for question and answers from the audience. But for now, I turn it over to Don Dexter. Don.
Thank you. I would like to start the presentation by just making a statement that our project does not represent the Klamath tribes of Oregon or the Modoc Nation of Oklahoma, and certainly doesn't speak for all Modoc people. It's simply our opportunity to share our voice and allow others to tell their stories as well. My name is Don Dexter. I'm Modoc, 7th generation descendant of Old Chief Sconchin, who was a signatory of the Klamath Treaty, 1864, and also Toby Riddle, who was an interpreter during the war and has been more popular or commonly referred to as Wainema. And in 1914, Wainema's son, Jeff Riddle, he wrote the first comprehensive book on the Modoc War, and it was called The Indian History of the Modoc War, as told from the Indian perspective. And so for me, that is the story and the family history that I grew up with. I was raised on the former Klamath Indian Reservation, which during the time of termination, government policy terminated federal recognition of many tribes, and mine was one of them. So I grew up in the termination era I received my bachelor's in psychology from Lewis and Clark and my dental degree from Oregon Health Sciences in Portland at OHSU. This is a very complicated story, and I'm going to try not to get mired down into a lot of the details. That's going to, I think, I'll save some room to really talk about the project itself. First off, Modoc, we've referred to ourselves as Motokni. It's become Modoc, but we were Motokni Muklux, which were the Modoc people. Our history with the land we came from goes back 12,000 years, and we referred to ourselves as people of the burnt out fires, and that was in reference to Medicine Lake in Northern California. Interesting thing about Medicine Lake is it is the largest by volume volcano in the Cascades. And that was the land that we came from. The Modoc people had a 5,000 square mile range going from the eastern flank of Mount Shasta to the west, to the north, the southern edge of Klamath Lake, to the east, Clear Lake, and to the south was Medicine Lake. And that was our range of existence up until 1864. And in 1864, the Modoc people were removed from that land and relocated to the Klamath Reservation in Southern Oregon. The interesting chain of events that led to that pressure to move the Modocs off the land, didn't start. People were coming through, settlers, trappers were coming through, but in 1846, the Applegate Trail was established, and that was the southern route to Oregon to the Willamette Valley. And the Applegate Trail came directly through the heart of Modoc land. And it was pretty appealing land. So a lot of the people jumped off the trail and decided to settle there. So that increased traffic into the area. And then that was followed by the California Gold Rush in 1848. And the Applegate Trail was used to get to the Siskiyou area, Wairika. So those two things greatly increased traffic through the heart of the Modoc territory. And then in 1850, California became a state. And then 1851, they announced their Indian policy. And the Indian policy was extermination. Today we would call that genocide, but at that time they called it extermination. And so with that policy and with those events, the fate of the Modoc people was basically sealed. And the bookend of the California termination or extermination policy was 1873, which was the So leading up to the war, the Modocs were signatories on the Treaty of 1864, and they were moved to Southern Oregon. That treaty ceded 20 million acres to the government, and in return, there was a 2 million acre reservation established. And the reservation was on the Klamath land. It was in the heart of the Klamath land. There were three groups of people: the Klamath, the Modoc, and then a small band of Northern Paiute was put on there. And most of the Modoc people, they settled onto the reservation. They were separated into two groups. The one group was under the leadership of the old chief. They were placed on the eastern edge of the reservation and settled in pretty much undisturbed and did well. Another group, which was under the leadership of Kinpuash, who was referred to as Captain Jack, they were placed on the Klamath Reservation directly in the middle of the Klamath people. And it wasn't a really good relationship because the Klamath and the Modoc were similar, same people going back and long time ago, but about 200-300 years prior to that, they had separated into two groups. And one became the northern people, which were the Klamath Lake, and then the other were the Modoc. And so even though they were common people, they weren't the closest of cousins, and they weren't the worst of enemies. But when they were moved onto the reservation, it was confrontational. And so Captain Jack Kinpuash, he decided to take his group of people and leave the reservation and return to their ancestral lands in Northern California. They complained of harassment by the Klamath people and the neglect of fulfilling treaty obligations by the government. So rather than live in government poverty and then at odds with the Klamath, they chose to return to their ancestral lands. In 1872, there was an effort to return the Modocs back to the reservation. By that time, there was a lot more settlement in the area. There were a lot more people coming in, and people, although the Modoc basically were getting along well with people, the settlers, the pressure was they didn't want them there on that land. So with a small group of people pressuring the government moved the Modocs back onto the reservation. And then in November of 1872, that was the precipitating action that led to the Modoc War. The military was directed to return them to the reservation, clearly stated peacefully if possible, but by any means as needed. So the Modoc War resulted from that, and it went from January 1873 to June 1873. The Modocs were under the leadership of Captain Jack, and during that confrontation, they never had more than 60 fighting age men involved on the Modoc side. There were around 160 people that had left the reservation, but less than 60 of them were actually of fighting age. And they were against a force of estimated up to 1,000 people at some point. They were against the military forces, the local militias, and a significant number of Indian scouts were brought in to help track them and fight them. So the war went from January to June. And what was interesting about the conflict, it was very unique because there were long periods of negotiation with intermittent conflict. And that allowed the war to be covered. There was a very large press coverage of the Modoc War. It just fascinated the world because it even had international coverage. It was covered in New York and Chicago, and people were fascinated with the story of the Modoc War because there was a lot of press and opportunity to cover it. So it had a broad interest, and as it turns out, it was the most expensive Indian war in U.S. history. Also, the only Indian conflict that a regular commissioned general was killed. During peace negotiations, General Canby, who was leading the military, he was killed, as well as another peace negotiator, Reverend Thomas. And so what began as peace negotiations following those killings became a campaign of extermination of the Modoc people. It was ultimately for these killings that 4 men were charged with war crimes. So what were the consequences of the Modoc War? Approximately 160 people who had left the reservation were returned to the reservation. 4 of the men, Captain Jack, Sconchese, Black Jim, and Boston Charlie, they were charged, tried, and convicted of the war crimes. And then on October 3rd, 1873, they were hung, executed for their involvement in the war. On October 12th, 9 days later, the remaining 156 members of their group were loaded onto wagons and taken to Redding, California. And from there, they were placed in cattle cars and shipped to Baxter Springs, Oklahoma. I can't imagine what they must have gone through to be placed onto the wagons and taken to Reading, and have never even seen a railroad car, a train, and then to be placed on those cars. They were placed into 4 cars and shipped to Oklahoma. The men, any male in that group who was of fighting age, they were shackled and transported shackled. And the Modoc people, they arrived in Oklahoma towards the end of November. It was a long trip. And eventually they were placed on the Quapaw Indian Reservation in the northeast corner of the state. And at that point, it was the ending of all remnants of the Modoc War. That's the history that brings us up to our project. And our project involves addressing, let me back up a little bit. When the men were executed, they were executed at Fort Klamath, the military fort in Fort Klamath, Oregon. They were hung, their heads were cut off and sent to a military museum in Maryland, and the bodies were buried. So in the 148 years since that event, those bodies have been buried, and they're basically where they were executed, where they are. So the graves are located at the site of their execution. They're situated inside a small metal fence, and they're marked by 4 plain wooden markers, each simply stating their name and execution and date of the execution, which was October 3rd, 1873. There are no other markers, plaques, or signage to acknowledge these people or the event, anything regarding that execution. So when I'm asked what's wrong with the graves currently, my response is that in that regard, they're existing like abandoned graves. Property is owned by Klamath County Museum. It's owned and managed by the Klamath County Museum. It's 8 acres. And it's interesting when you walk around that property that there are many other objects on that property that do have signage and plaques commemorating their significance. But the Modoc graves, there is nothing there other than the small fence with the markers. I feel like that is really an omission of history and a disrespect of not just the story, but these men specifically. So the question goes from what's wrong with those graves to what do we want to do to change that? And so my concern was, what do we do to respect those graves? What do we do to honor that? My initial reaction was we need to take these men home. But then thinking that there was no home to take them to because that land was all occupied, I thought that the least we could do would be to place a memorial on that site. And so to pay respect to those graves in that event, I offered to donate a memorial to be placed on the site of the Modoc graves. The offer was to gift a memorial to the Modoc Nation of Oklahoma and to the Klamath tribes of Oregon. And by making that offer and by their acceptance of that gift, the gift would pass through them as a gift to all Modoc descendants. Plan for the memorial was to go back to the Medicine Lake area, our ancestral lands, to respectfully harvest a rock from that area, and to place that rock on the site of where those graves are, to place the rock directly on the ground. There's nothing between that rock from our lands and that ground where they are. So harvest a rock from Medicine Lake, set it directly on the ground, and put it on the south edge of the graves because it brings the land closer to the people. have two bronze plaques on there, one facing to the rising sun of the east, which commemorates the men in the event, and the other plaque facing west to the setting sun to remind us at the end of every day that we're still there, Modoc people, that we're still there. That was my inspiration, and that was my plan of what I wanted to do. And it goes back to my intro where I said this project does not represent the Klamath or the Modoc tribes, although they're involved. And it represents people, and we wanted to do something that we could just get accomplished and get it done. And when I say placing a rock, I say a significant rock. And people, it's funny because the question is, well, what is a significant sized rock? I mean, is it something two people carry? Is it something you put in your pocket? What's significant? And, you know, I've gone out and sized rocks for reference, and we're looking probably about a 1,600 pound rock. So that is significant. So our project was, you know, what is wrong with the graves? I felt they were abandoned, what we were going to do with it. We want to place a memorial there. And then the third question is, how does this war affect the Modoc people currently? And that really is the crux of our project. How does the war affect Modoc people currently? The intention is to not just document the process of placing a memorial, but to have oral histories and stories to allow people to talk and tell their stories, so we can address that question of how does it affect Modoc people currently. We very importantly don't want this to be a story of victims, because these are the stories of survival, and every Modoc person that is here today is a survivor of events that they've had to overcome incredible odds. So it's a success and a celebration. The story is intended to be very positive. It's intended to give a voice and courage to those who want to stand up, and we honestly feel that these are stories that should be told and seen. And you know, I sincerely believe that these are stories that exemplify that we are Modoc, we are Motokni, and as our title said, we endeavor to persevere. And I feel very fortunate in this process that I've met a person who is young, sincere, enthusiastic, and it's just going to be a great compliment to have Christelle involved with this project and helping me on it. And I'll turn it over.
Thanks, Don. So my name is Christelle, and I am a freelance videographer and filmmaker. I graduated from the University of Oregon with a degree in journalism and environmental studies, and I graduated in June of this year, so fairly recently. When Don first told me about the story about the Modoc War, I was so captivated by it, and I really wanted to help out with the process. He first told me about it back in December of 2020, and I was in school at the time, so it was just a perfect timing because I was in a few documentary classes, so I was able to utilize the resources from my school, so like rent cameras and talk with professors about how I'm able to help tell the story. So I educated myself on the story, and I started reading a lot of books about the Modoc War and talking with Don and learning more about the story itself. And then I was able to rent some cameras from school and get footage of both Don talking about the story and his personal experience. And then we were able to go together and get some footage of Modoc land, so the lava beds and Tule Lake and the graves itself. My goal with this project is to work with Don and help bring representation to the Modoc people and get this story talked about and bring more awareness to the public. Many people don't know about the story, and I believe that it deserves recognition. when I tell people about this story, most are unaware that it even exists, that the Modoc War even happened, and it isn't talked about, nor is it taught in school ever. Another goal that I have with this story is to help tell it in a way that captivates the audience and keeps their attention, because there's a lot of Modoc documentaries out there that are very educational, but I don't think it will necessarily be as engaging with the audience, and unless I help tell the story in a way that's really captivating and captures people's attention span. So working on both educating and making the story engaging and able to tell it and document it in a way that people will remember and absorb it and want to talk about it. And since I don't have a connection to the Modoc War story myself or the Modoc people, I'm able to help tell it in a way where I don't interject my own personal perspective on it. So I guess that's a bonus where I can tell it from like an outsider perspective. And I'm really grateful to be a part of this project, and I'm excited to help out with the process and the creativity behind it.
And if I could jump in really quick on that last bit, there have been a lot of documentaries, movies, and books written about this, and all of them have been either told by someone else outside or under the approval and the authority of someone else. So the nice thing about this is it is in my consideration, it's a true story. It's a true story in that we're going to allow people to speak their truth. And I have a bias in many ways because I grew up there, and that's where having Christelle involved is she has no bias. She just has a pure interest. And that is really going to pull, that's going to pull the true and honest stories from people that they want to share.
Yeah, so with the production process, we have been working on this since last December 2020. And at first, Don just showed me a small video that he had captured of the graves and him narrating over it. And so that was kind of the start of the production, which is that little video where he had this intense emotional narration. And since then, we've gotten some more footage of the graves and of the Modoc land. And a lot of what we've been doing has been more behind the scenes and with the pre-production, just planning and setting up our GoFundMe and writing articles about this and just trying to get it all planned out. And so we've been meeting a few times a month to discuss about the next steps. And yeah, we created a GoFundMe, and I wrote an article about the story where I interviewed Don. And we were also recently in the Eugene Weekly, so that was great for some coverage and to get the story out there more. And we're currently working on writing grants. So that's a lot of the pre-production stuff that we've been doing. And then in terms of actual production, we've been going out and filming at Fort Klamath where the graves are. We've been going to the lava beds where the actual war happened, and Tule Lake where the Modoc people lived and hunted and gathered. And we're hoping to go to Medicine Lake soon to film the gathering of a rock. And while we're at those places, we're filming both the place and interviewing Don about his stories. And hopefully we'll get some more Modoc people to talk to about their stories. And then we're also hoping to travel to Oklahoma to meet with the Modoc people there. And that will be a whole another adventure. And then for post-production with it consists of like editing all the stuff and posting it on social media, and even like creating the documentary out of it. So right now I'm in the process of editing a lot of the footage that we've gotten so far and just making small videos about it for like trailers or little teasers to put on Instagram and Facebook and get out there so that there's some kind of footage that people can see, because right now we mostly just have articles and photos. So that's right now the post-production aspect of it. And then in the future, when we have more footage, start compiling it together and really hopefully have a team by then so we can start making it a bigger production, a large documentary.
One of the things that we said when we started, when we sat down and we talked about doing this, is we said we wanted to go big because it's a big story. And our initial plan seemed very simple in consideration now of we wanted to gather a rock, set it on the land, everybody would hug, laugh, some would cry, and would tell stories. Going back to what we said about going big, the story is growing and it's expanding for me more than I could have imagined. It's developing into such an incredible story. And that's why initially I think we were overambitious of, we're going to hurry up and we're just going to get this in the can. But now as the story continues to expand, we realize that it is a lot more production process and pre-production and planning and letting the story blossom. And I was kind of discouraged because when we met last year, I thought, geez, by October, we're going to be hitting the film circuit, where here we are in October, and it is just going to become such a great project, how it's expanding beyond anything I could have imagined. And I know that sounds vague, but the story is growing. Our initial plan is the same, but it's growing in how we're going to do it.
Dawn and Christelle, thanks so much. Let's dive right into some questions. You both have talked a lot about the importance of how we tell this story through monuments, through video. And we've seen nationwide a real focus on monuments, what we choose to remember, what we choose to forget, whether it's the history of lynchings in America, Confederate monuments, all sorts of things like this. And so I wonder how you see your project fitting into that larger effort across the United States to contextualize our history, and whether you see any models out there of groups or individuals or institutions who have done a good job figuring out how to properly memorialize things like the Modoc War, and whether you're looking to them for encouragement and guidance. Thanks.
The question you ask has brought up to me what I refer to as the marketplace of memory. History has two stories: the true history of what happened, and then our memory of what happened. And our memory of what happened really has a value, and that's where it enters into the marketplace. Memory of an event could have a tangible value because it's a souvenir. We sell something. And that's what happened prior to those men being executed the night before they were hung. People went in and bought their hats and bought their gloves and bought stuff. So there was a marketplace for that memory. There's also the other marketplace of our memory. We tell stories based on what we get out of it. What do we get out of that? What is the transaction? When I first proposed to do a memorial, I was talking with the Klamath County Museum director because I wanted to start seeing what we would have to do to be able to do that. And his first response was, "Are you going to put a bronze there? Are you going to put a big bronze?" And to me, that starts putting somebody else's memory into the marketplace. Then we start having to hire somebody to do this. Now they're part of the market. Now we have people who are saying, I want it to be this, I want it to be that. And the memorial becomes lost because of the different people involved with it. I felt this was, I didn't look at any other memorial. I didn't look at any other examples because, to be quite honest, I tried to remove myself from it, and I tried to remove other people from it, and to very simply, humbly place a rock. Now the rock's going to have 2 plaques on it, and yeah, I will have some involvement with that memory. But by doing it this way, we're allowing everybody who sees that rock to have their own interpretation of what it means to them, what it symbolizes. And down the road, I think it would be really hard for somebody to come back and say, let's take that monument down, because our market has changed, our memory has changed, and it no longer serves what we want it to do. So that, that's how I came up with the memorial, and how it went from having the term of being a memorial to considering what the marketplace of memory is, and trying to remove that as much as we could to allow everybody who sees it to enter into that marketplace on their own. Because it's found that the person that controls the marketplace actually controls the memory, and we didn't want that.
Thank you. Next question from City Club President-elect Karin Knudsen. Karin.
Thank you all so much for being with us here today and sharing this project with our community and City Club membership. I have heard it said that filmmaking is the opportunity to live many lifetimes, and your project makes me think of that in a different way. I'm wondering if the 2 of you, and maybe Christelle first, could talk a little bit about the collaborative process and your decision to use cinematography and create a film to help realize this story, share this story, and share this memory.
I think filmmaking is really powerful, especially when telling stories, because it includes the element of both visual and audio. And our collaborative process, I think, is important because I'm able to use the skills that I've learned to help tell the story, where Dawn is behind it, helping direct me in terms of how to do it in a way that's from the Modoc perspective, and not just from a historian or someone who's way too outside of the Modoc people. But then it's not also just the Modoc perspective. It's also, I can tell from me as an outsider. So I think that collaboration is really special. And then in terms of making a film out of it, that's kind of my specialty, is creating videos and filmmaking. And I just think it's one of the most powerful ways to tell a story. And the fact that I can document people talking about their own oral history and what they've grown up with, and I can document moments as they unfold in terms of the memorial and the creation and the whole process behind it, and not just the history, but also the history and the present and the future. It can all be brought into one film and be told in this fluid way that it's kind of being told in present moment. And so I think that's really special, because there's so much that can go into a film.
Terrific. Thank you. Next question from City Club member Mary Layton. Mary.
So just as you were speaking, I was reminded of a book title by Richard Rodriguez, Hunger of Memory. And I can't really remember what the book was, but the term came to me because I was thinking about your hunger of memory, Don, that you have a sense that you want the story to be told, and you're aware of the need to fill this hunger with the memories as they come to you. So I have, so sort of apropos of that, Senate Bill 13 a couple of years ago required that all Oregon public schools teach the indigenous history of the state. And the 9 recognized tribes have been participating in development of curriculum, which is interesting because they all have their own memories, and they all have their own values and their approaches to things, their phenomenological approach. So I guess I'm not sure if the Modocs are part of that or not, or even if the Klamaths are, but I just wondered if someone said to you, Don, what are the values or moments or people that are the most important for the children of Oregon to know about as models of culture and action living? What are some of the things that come to you?
Boy, that is a hard one, because it, to speak of that puts me in a place I don't feel I'm yet qualified to speak. And maybe I'm kidding myself, but that type of question is something that we ask of our elders. We ask our elders those questions. Now, I can push that out and say, well, what's the definition of an elder? It's anyone that's 15 years older than you. But, in answering that question, I still don't feel like I have found my place to speak as an elder for those types of issues. And I still feel that there are people I defer to, that myself, I defer to them and I ask them those questions still. So I'm still learning, and this whole project has been, very big and as far as my discovery, but I still have people that I look to, and, honestly, I am an elder by definition in tribal communities. But, it's hard to speak of that, and that's why it goes back to just in this project where I keep saying, well, this is speaking for me and us. And, I look forward to, as we move along, that what we're saying is what Christelle's saying, well, Don said, and we start getting other people involved and start bringing them into the conversation. Because we're so early in the production, a lot of it is just Don said, but we hope through those stories we start getting those answers to the question that you just asked. But I don't feel I'm there yet to answer that. I like the question. I want to
push on this one. You are building a monument to 4 guys that were convicted of murder, basically, and you actually represented 2 of the dead guys, the dead white guys, who were important enough for you to remember mentioning. So, speaking as a person prepared to believe that whatever happened made complete moral sense to the people who died, why did you pick this thing? What is it about this story that really grabbed you so strong that you wanted to do this personal action on it?
It would take me an hour, but let me see if I can give you just a 30 second. Give me 45 seconds. I'll hit the timer. I grew up. My story growing up was I'm Modoc. I'm a descendant of Wainima. I'm an Oregon Indian. I grew up on the Klamath Indian Reservation. That was my life story. And the 242 fire on Labor Day last year burned down part of the Klamath Indian Reservation, former reservation, including some old government buildings of the agency. One of those buildings was an old agency school. People cried. People were upset, tribal people. we lost this, we lost this. And I drove down there in October, and I wanted to see that site, because in my mind, I felt, why are we crying for buildings and structures that not only represented, but also created generational trauma, epigenetic trauma? I mean, maybe I was arrogant, but I said, I can't understand why we're crying for them. And I wonder why we didn't burn them down ourselves. So I drove down and I went to look at those buildings, kind of a looky-loo. I want to see what's going on. And when I sat there and I looked at them, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel happy. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel anything. But as I sat there, I thought, 3 miles up the road from here are these 4 Modoc graves, and nobody has ever talked about them. So I drove up the road from those burned buildings. I drove up the road, and they were locked in a gated fence. They were fenced in. I climbed over the fence to get in there. And when I jumped inside that fence, I had a strange anxiety of, I'm trapped. What if I can't get out? And then it made me think about, well, what was it like for them? And they're still there. And I walked back to the graves. And it was beautiful country beyond what, it was beautiful country. But as I looked to the south, I could see Mount Shasta. I cried. I cried. Like Christelle said, I just started doing these emotional videos. And it was at that point that I had this epiphany that my story I started with saying I'm Modoc, I'm Oregon Indian, Native, Klamath. No, I'm California Indian. I came from the land of burnout fires. I was a Californian. And that prompted me to say, we got to do something about this. And I'm 64 years old, and I grew up with that story. How many of our kids are still with that story? That was my motive, was to expand this, and that's why the story keeps expanding. So I had an epiphany, and I was hoping that through my epiphany that I could inspire and share that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Next question from Ralph Pledger. Ralph.
Hello, I have a kind of a curveball question. Dr. Dexter, I read some of your biographical material off the internet. You indicated in one of them, I don't recall which one, that you had an early passion to become a dentist, which I think you indicated was probably a little odd. It isn't like, wanting to be an astronaut or, Superman or whatever. Is there any connection between that unusual and early ambition and your Modoc identity, your reservation experience?
There is, and it's interesting you bring this up. There's a couple of things. One is, earlier I said that I grew up during the termination era. Federal policy in 1954 was termination, which was to end federal recognition of certain tribes. And I joke and I say, I like to tell real Indian stories of a real non-Indian. To the government, I was a real non-Indian, but I grew up on that reservation, that former reservation. So I had a unique experience in that, on the one hand, I had these family stories, this existence. The government didn't make my skin lighter. It didn't take away the land. It didn't take away my family history, but it said I was an Indian. But growing up on the reservation, and now it's kind of coming back to me with this realization, is maybe intuitively I felt like I was an outsider, and I wanted to leave. I wanted to go. So there, wanting to be a dentist coming from where I came from was probably as crazy as wanting to be Superman or an astronaut, because nobody can see being either of those. So, for me, that was a stretch, but maybe I was restless because that wasn't our land. I don't know. Past year, I've said, I don't know a lot.
Sometimes it's a good thing to say.
Mary mentioned Senate Bill 13, and indeed the Lane County Board of Commissioners recently adopted an ordinance to celebrate the second Monday in October, this Monday coming up actually, as Indigenous Peoples Day, as opposed to Columbus Day as it was historically known. These moves, these bills, these actions are representative of an effort, at least by the public sphere, whether it be local, state, county government, to recognize both the history of Indigenous peoples and also the need to teach it in a really significant way. I'm curious if you, either in your sort of as part of this project, have thought more about what other types of things civic institutions and government can and should be doing in this space. In other words, it probably shouldn't lean entirely on you or individuals. What should we collectively, as a society and as a region, do to better provide for not only the history but for the people who remain?
One of the earlier questions of Christelle was, what is the collaborative process? And I think that is key, is collaboration. I am so happy to have Christelle working on this project because our story will expand through her experience. And we've had experiences where I've experienced things before and she hasn't. And so seeing that, she will grow and she will pass those lessons on. So I really think that it just is about collaboration and bringing in people who have sincere interest. And so, I mean, I just think it's just looking for those collaborations creatively and finding them where we don't think they were not, they previously existed.
Next question from Mary.
Well, I was thinking, Don, about something David Harrelson told me one time when we were doing our monument project last year, and I said, what do I need to know? He's the cultural caretaker for the Grand Ronde tribes, and he said, well, we don't do memorials the way you guys do. And then, so when you started to talk about the stones in place, I thought, right, we that really does emerge from a different consciousness and way than we might have thought. But the collaborative thing that you've chosen to do with Christelle across a generation, for sure, and definitely in a modern technology way, makes me wonder, Christelle, have you thought of different questions you think can be answered in documentary in this arena? Has your mind changed at all about how you do cinematography for this purpose as opposed to any other purpose?
Yeah, it's totally different trying to work with such an intense subject, because there's so much generational trauma. There's so much that is behind it. It's not just mechanically capturing it. You really have to also be connected, and you have to be empathetic. You have to have those type of skills too. And it's totally different because you have to be really individual with whoever you're talking with, because each person, they have a totally different experience with the story, and you need to really be mindful of what their needs are and what they want to share. And so that's totally different than some stuff I've done in the past, because it is a very sensitive subject. And then also just trying to work out the process of creating a whole documentary in general is huge, because that's just a whole project on its own. So it's kind of a giant learning process, and I'm learning as I'm going, and I'm just trying to be open to new ways of creating and telling the story. So yeah, it's definitely something I'm working on, and just every day trying to think of new ways and collaborate on what's best.
Terrific. Thank you. If people who are listening or watching want to become involved, want to support your effort, what can they do? How can they get in touch with you? Any guidance for our listening audience?
I'll defer to you, Christelle.
Okay. Right now we have a Instagram. It's at Modoc Documentary. And so you can follow that. And in that Instagram, there's a link in the bio to the GoFundMe, which you can donate to, and it tells the story. And then within the GoFundMe, there's a link to an article if you want to read more about it. And so that's most of what we have now. If you want to get in contact with us, we're working on creating more social media exposure, and I'm in the process of making a YouTube channel to get some videos out there. So we have that. And then if you want to email, our Gmail is also modocdocumentary@gmail.com. So those are all the ways that you can contact us. And yeah.
One of the things I've appreciated in this community, because it is a small community and it's pretty cohesive, I've had people just call me direct. I've had people just email me, and I like that. I appreciate that, because we are grassroots. We are, we're like two small people with a big dream, and it's fun because people are reaching out. And so I've got personal emails, I've got personal phone calls, and it's not like it's overwhelmed, but I really appreciate if somebody wants to reach out and just talk directly about it. It's a passion story, and I think we enjoy telling it.
Thank you so much for telling it to us today. And thank you for all the work that you are doing to raise consciousness about it, both in our region, across the country. That's all the time we have for City Club of Eugene. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been our October 8th, 2021 program, The Aftermath of Great Loss, the Modoc People Persevere. I'd like to thank our diamond sponsors. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members in the community we serve. More information at www.kp.org. Support comes from the University of Oregon. Since 1876, the university has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically. More information at www.uoregon.edu. Peace Health is proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond. As your hometown healthcare provider of more than 80 years, our mission is to keep you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. And Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. I would also like to acknowledge our Ruby sponsor, Johnson Johnson Lucas in Middleton. Johnson Johnson Lucas in Middleton is a team of experienced, compassionate attorneys fighting for justice. If you've been seriously harmed by wrongdoing and need help, contact us at justicelawyers.com. And City Club's gold sponsors, Archimoto, Doctors Fine, Hoffman, and Sims, and Homes for Good Housing Agency. Thank you also to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, PAC Info and Simplified Computing LLC, and Dotson's Photography. And a special thank you to public radio station KLCC FM 89.7 for airing City Club programs on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Our programs are always available on your YouTube channel and Facebook page, as well as Podbean. In our next program, we will take a look at the immigrant experience in Oregon with a forum titled "The State of Immigrants, a New Look at the Immigrant Experience in Oregon." So please join us on October 15th. More details about this upcoming forum and future programs can be found on the City Club website. And lastly, a final thank you to today's speakers for a great program, Dr. Donald Dexter and Christelle Ozis. And thank you all for joining us for the City Club of Eugene. This concludes today's program. Take care.